So welcome to episode 5 of Recruiter Fuel, where we're going to continue this conversation around engaging and building trust with candidates. But before we get into today's session, let's do a quick review of what we covered in last week's episode, where we started to look at the differences between the traditional model of recruiting and what I call the new model of recruiting, or what I entitled active attraction. If you remember, in the old model, we spent the majority of our time in the communication mode of declare and debate. So 50% of our time was in telling or filling the need. Only 10 to 15 to 20% of our time was in really engaging and building trust and uncovering the needs of the candidate that we were talking to. So a full 80% in our traditional way of recruiting was spent in declare and debate, and less than 20% was in this idea of dialogue or trust building or getting the candidate to persuade themselves. As we looked at this idea of active attraction, we basically turned the triangle or the funnel upside down. And this is where we're going to spend 85% of our time actually building engagement and trust with the candidate that we're talking with. And if we do that correctly, or when we do that correctly, only 10% of our dialogue becomes declare, where we're filling the need with the solution that we have, and ultimately only 5% of our time focuses on the last piece, which is gaining commitment, or in other words, closing. But we want to continue that conversation. We want to focus on something a little bit different in the actual dialogue that we have with the candidate. It's this tool that I call a personalized picture. We're going to look at this tool that you can use to quickly connect with any candidate that you talk to and have them quickly become curious about the career or the opportunity that you potentially have to offer them. It's a powerful and flexible tool that you can use in a variety of situations to bond faster with candidates. And again, it's called this idea of a personalized picture. So let's first look at what a traditional recruiter does. When a potential candidate you call asks the question, what do you want? What's the position? Why are you calling me? How do you typically answer? Do you answer with something like this? Hey, I'm calling from ABC Company, saw your profile on LinkedIn, and I wanted to talk to you about this great opportunity that I have in my company. So what does this mean to the candidate who just asked you the question? Really, it means that you want to waste their time, is the impression that you're leaving. It means it's all about you and not about them because it's what you're looking for. It means you're trying to fill a need that you know nothing about because you haven't had any dialogue with the candidate up to this point. Who's going to say, look, I have this really crappy opportunity that I want to talk to you about? Nobody's going to do that. So what typically happens next? The candidate says something like, hey, I'm not interested in roles right now. Call me in 6 months. Call me in 12 months. And it's kind of the polite brush off. Too many people are saying, hey, I'm just not interested, because we're approaching them with these great career opportunities. So what a recruiter that is following active attraction does is quite a bit different. Recruiters know that the way to attract potential candidates to you like a magnet is not to tell people the role you're recruiting for, but to tell them how you are going to help them. Make it all about them and not about you. Look, if you're a third-party agency, you make money by placing the right candidates. If you're a corporate recruiter, you live with the reputation you create by engaging and placing the right candidates. Either way, we've got to stop selling a position up front and focus on what you can do for the candidates, the value that you can bring to the candidates, and selling yourself before you sell the actual positions. Look, most recruiters, we tell. We are not solving problems. Our jobs are to engage them in a dialogue, not declare and debate, and open the door to better understanding their needs. So here's an example of what to say when you're calling a digital marketing professional who asks, what do you want? What's the position? Why are you, in essence, calling me? My reply would be, so you know how a lot of digital marketing leaders are promised one opportunity, but when they join the company, they realize it's something completely different? Well, as the recruiter, what I do is I help professionals like that find opportunities that allow them to own both the technology and the marketing assets so they can really make an impact on the business. And they don't have to stay up at night feeling like the tech team is working against them. Tell me, have you ever experienced that before? Do you see how this strategy paints a different picture? It paints a picture of how you can help that particular individual. Your reply focuses on some of the general challenges that most people in a specific role can identify with and be aware of. But you have to know the actual business and the potential hot buttons. Now, if a person you reach out to identifies with this and knows the pain of technology and the digital marketing team being split into two separate groups, and your position combines them, do you think they're going to want to know more? Listen, even if they're not experiencing it now, but have experienced it in the past, it will create an almost immediate curiosity. And what does that do? It ultimately opens up the dialogue. So let me break down this idea of a personalized picture to you as you start to create your own introductions when you're reaching out to potential candidates. And it's really based on three different parts that were in that example. Number one is the problem. Number two is this idea of providing a solution. And number three is closing with a question, obviously to open the dialogue. So let's look at each one of these here really quickly again. Number one is this idea of the problem. I often start with this you know how and go into the rest of the story and add one or two generic big problems that the candidate will most likely identify with, whether now or in their past. But you must do some research to determine what those problems are and to really understand the position itself. These are general problems common to that role that you might even be able to find online. And if not, you're ultimately going to be able to get from your position intake and talking to the hiring manager. So understanding potential problems. Number two is this idea of the solution. Remember, this active attraction-based recruiters are problem solvers. They're not position pushers. You're not, should not be, a position pusher. Your job is to engage in dialogue to discover the problem, find out what is causing the problem, and how that problem is ultimately affecting the potential candidate. And we miss that. So we go into the solution, and the idea is to be able to demonstrate that you understand these common problems and help candidates solve the challenges that are associated with the problem. The key here is to use really simple language. Don't go overboard and actually be a little bit generic. Well, what I do is I help professionals like you in this marketing situation. It's again, well, what I do is I help professionals, and continue on to the fact that you have experience with the potential solutions to the problem. So now we have a general problem. Now we have your experience filling that potential solution. And the final piece is to end with a question. You need to turn the focus back on the other person and start exploring and uncovering what their problems are and what you can do to help them. So number one is the problem. Well, you know how. What are the general issues to that particular problem? Number two is the solution. Well, what I do is I help professionals in this solution. The solution is what you do that helps them solve the actual problems. And number three is the question. Tell me, have you ever experienced the same? I'm curious, when's the last time you experienced that? Churning the discussion and the dialogue back onto them and opening up the opportunity to start to learn more about that candidate. The magic of the personalized picture is to understand the position in the individual you're calling about, understanding the common needs, and ending it with a question that ultimately relates it back to them. Now, in next week's session, we're going to build on what we've learned in the last two episodes and continue this conversation with candidates to drive more dialogue and continue building trust. And we're going to do that through a series of 12 questions that I'm going to share with you next week. See you then.